Taylor Mason, thank you for joining me today. You are outside of Vancouver?
I am, yeah, just outside of Vancouver.
I'm always like trying to keep track of where everybody is. So a Canadian, we have lots of Canadians in our audience. I have a lot of community manager university Canadians. So I think we have to tell the story of how I found you, and then we'll have you run through your background. And then Taylor's going to talk about content marketing today. So speaking of content marketing, I think I first saw you on LinkedIn because I tend to scan LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn. It doesn't suck me in quite as much as Facebook does. And I follow launch workplaces. And I think you posted a little case study of some work you've done for Launch and Mike Creel and his team. And I was like, who is this guy? And I think I clicked on your blog post and then I subscribed to your newsletter. And then you so kindly mentioned me in your newsletter right after I subscribed. And I was like, who is this guy? It was a happy
coincidence.
It was totally
you so happened to have put a podcast out that was like right on the money for me. And I was like, well, this works.
I know. So totally one of those like serendipitous timing things. So I was like, who is this guy who's now mentioning my podcast episode in his newsletter? So I reached out and it turns out you met Kevin Whalen at a dog park, which is also super serendipitous. And Kevin's been on the podcast. I need to get him back on. He hasn't been on in a while, but his episodes are fan favorites. He talks a lot about marketing, and we've talked about Google ads and paid advertising. Yeah. So Taylor, tell us kind of your story, and we're going to talk about content marketing. So Taylor has a varied marketing background, but is focusing on content marketing for co-working spaces. So I'll stop talking. Taylor, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I started my career actually in PR in 2013, and so that's kind of where I learned this love and respect for organic engagement with people. It's always felt really powerful to me and felt like something that needs to be utilized more and sometimes isn't. But I think a lot like you, I know that you kind of said in your corporate life, you felt like you were getting the soul sucked out of you. And I started to feel the same way in my career, and I was looking at the trajectory and I just didn't feel right. So I got an opportunity to start taking on some content projects, and over a number of years, I started to build this business up, and eventually I realized, actually, I think that content has kind of like all the best storytelling aspects of PR, which PR was losing. So it just seemed like a great transition. And I left, got into a co-working space. I hadn't really heard of it before, and I was working there, and I was like, this is incredible. These people are amazing. The environment is inspiring, and I kind of just fell in love with it. And talk about serendipitous. It just so happened that I got a few opportunities to work with co-working spaces and realized that it was a huge, I think, untapped opportunity. And I think that there was, not a lot of people realized how amazing it was yet. And I wanted to be able to help tell that story and help, showcase a better way to work for people. So that's how I ended up where I am today, long story short.
So what was it that drove you to join your first co-working space?
I was just working at home for like 3 or 4 months probably. And then I kind of, being in an agency environment for so long where it was like hustle and bustle all the time. And, I was in management. So there was people in and out of my doors, and I was constantly talking to people in meetings. And then I transitioned to being at home and like didn't leave my sweatpants for 3 or 4 months and had no engagement. I started to feel a little bit stir crazy. So at the time I was looking at options, and eventually just bit the bullet. I was like, I gotta get out of the house. I can't stay here anymore. I'm gonna go crazy. And so I did, and it was awesome. It was such an eye-opening experience, and it made me put on jeans.
Right, totally. Yeah. And did you feel like you were new to working on your own, right? And for working for yourself, did you feel like you needed to be like with other people who were doing something similar, like from a mindset perspective?
Yeah, totally. And you would get into these conversations with people who weren't doing what you were doing, but they were kind of in the same grind as you, right? Like everybody's there, everybody's trying to build something, everybody's working hard. You see the same people there at 7 a.m. leaving at 7 p.m. and you're doing the same thing because everybody's trying to get to that ultimate goal they have or whatever. And it was super inspiring. And being at home with the dog was nice, but she didn't exactly get me motivated to work harder. So being around a lot of people with the same mindset was a huge boost, and it was a great learning experience.
Yeah. So it was kind of a loaded question, but I keep talking about from a marketing perspective, like what are you selling on your website, right? Like how do you explain to people, how do you bottle that reason that you got out of your house, right?
Yeah,
It's not really about you needed a desk because you've got a desk at home. It's like you needed something to help jumpstart your mindset and feeling like your routine and like feeling professional, and maybe like a little imposter syndrome, like you're sitting in your sweatpants and you're,
absolutely.
at your desk at home and you're like, am I real? Am I, do I still, have what it takes? Like, I need to
Yeah.
leave the house and feel like a professional. I also read yesterday, I was just trying to think of where it was, but an article that showed some research. Somebody did a study on a negotiation scenario, and like half the people were in sweatpants and half the people were in suits. And the people in suits just like blew the sweatpant people out of the water in terms of the like dollar amount that they negotiated. And the
Yeah.
point was like, look, right, the sweatpants matters. Like you don't have to wear a suit, but you need to like get
It's
take
funny
it
that
up.
that's where we're at, that we're actually looking at that now, obviously with remote work taking off, but it's so true. You got to take yourself a little bit seriously to have other people take you seriously, as much as, they say it's a suit make the man or whatever. I guess it must a little bit, but
I think it does, even just with your own mindset. Okay, so I was peppering you with questions before we started about like ROI on content marketing. And
yeah.
so we'll start from the beginning and just kind of talk about. So I've had folks like Kevin and recently had Ruben, who are both Canadians, on the podcast talking about, paid content. And I'm a big advocate for Google ads. And, you need to find your active searchers, where you need to attract your active searchers because they're
Yeah.
the ones like ready to make a decision, ready to pay you. They probably need space.
Yeah.
But you play in the land of like organic engagement, building a brand over time. I'd love to just kind of hear, let's start with, from your perspective, what's the value of, organic engagement for co-working spaces versus, the paid ads?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that the real value, and it's the same as when I was doing PR and working with marketing teams and advertisers, is that it's kind of the yin to the yang, right? I mean, it's important to do the paid, but you also need to have an organic side that complements it, which is a little bit more organic. It gets to people in a more value-driven way, and you're providing something that's useful to them rather than just selling them something. And so I know I mentioned to you, there's something called the mere exposure effect, and I don't know where this started. I heard it from a business strategist named Kerwin Ray. He's an Australian guy, but essentially the idea here is that back in 2005, you only needed 5 exposures to somebody before they would have trust and familiarity with your brand, which obviously for businesses is huge. You need to have that trust built with people. And now it's something like 20 exposures. And the thing is, how do you get 20 exposures to people to build that trust without annoying them? I don't know I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but I've opened up Instagram and seen ad over ad over ad to the point where I just want to throw my phone out the window because it's too much. So to get to that 20 exposures, organic content is a great way to do that because it's value driven. You can get your brand in front of people without constantly selling. You can give them something they can use. They call it utility content, right? It's things that entertain, things that inform, things that are helpful rather than just straight up salesy. So I think that's really important.
So would you say, I'm curious about, when I think about who's going to buy a co-working membership, I think about it in terms of like those people that are solution aware and problem aware and solution aware. I know I don't like being at home and I'm aware of co-working. And so I'm going to go Google co-working near me. And those folks probably are going to get to you through, your Google My Business listing, your website, and the sales funnel for those folks is going to be shorter. And then I think about all the people out there, especially now, who aren't, maybe they're vaguely problem aware, but they're not really solution aware. They don't know much about co-working or sort of the value of it, right? They may think of it as sort of just space. So is content marketing more for the second audience, or how would you tell an operator to think about who you're going after?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really it could be for both in a lot of ways, but I think that the way to look at content marketing is to think about, your podcast or your episode the other week where you talk about really identifying your own values and what makes you unique is so important. And I was going to mention that too, because I think that with co-working, it's such a community-based experience, right? And I think that one space is not going to work for everybody. Every space has its own culture, its own thing that makes it unique. So I think that you should think about content marketing from the perspective of who is your audience? Like who do you want to get in there? And then you would craft your content around it. So it could be that they're looking, it could be that they're not aware yet, and you're able to inform them, create a knowledge gap. You know, you can teach them that it's available and why it might be helpful, or you can just give them education about why this is the right one for them. So I think it really just depends on your approach, and it's kind of like you know, like how long is the string sort of thing. You can tailor your approach to reach whoever you need to. It depends on how you get there.
Yep. So you talk and brand build. So talk a little bit about how you build sort of that brand, that story through content marketing. You know, you talk about I think that the good news is each co-working space, you know, is a little bit different. And so if you can communicate the fact that you are different and give people a sense of your culture and your brand, then you can attract people. But yeah, can you kind of talk about how you do that through content marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, first and foremost, it comes back to, you know, as you said before, it just worked out that you mentioned that on the podcast, but understanding what you're all about and what value you bring to people, and then articulating that properly. You got to know your audience, right? I mean, if you're going to appeal to satellite teams more than, you know, independent creative people, then you're going to take a different approach. So the tone that you use, the kind of content that you put out is going to be different. If you're dealing with, you know, say small business owners who are looking to bootstrap their PR efforts or whatever it might be, then you can put out content that will teach them how to, you know, leverage PR tactics for under $500. Whereas if it's a big corporate team, you might approach them with something like, you know, how to hire, you know, remote talent or whatever it might be. So you really just got to tailor your content experience to those people. And in doing so, you kind of define what your space is all about. You can also look at things like member spotlights, profiling the people who actually use your space. You know, I know when I was looking for a co-working space, one of the big things that helped put me over not the edge, but, you know, that made me make my decision was seeing the kind of people who were working there and understanding that there was going to be a place where like-minded people to myself were. Whereas I probably wouldn't have been a fit at a massive space that had, you know, all corporate satellite teams. It wouldn't have been the right fit for me. So it just comes down to knowing what you're all about, knowing who your ideal member is, and then targeting or tailoring the content that you put out to appeal to them specifically. Yeah.
And I think some space owners struggle with making that commitment. Like they sort of want to be for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's hard. You have to make that commitment when you do content, because otherwise you'd be too generic and you can't get to the people that, you know, to your point, they have to talk directly to you in order to attract you.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about a niche as well, right? I think that, and it's funny because I've gone through this exercise with my own business, is picking a niche is scary because you feel like maybe you're narrowing your scope so much that you're going to run out of options. But the reality is that a niche just shows that you're specialized to one person, or that you appeal more specifically to one particular audience, which is great because you don't need 75% of the people who fit that category. You just need, you know, a few hundred or 100 members, or, you know, whatever your number is. So having a niche is great because it lets you dial in on specific people without going too broad.
Totally. I think co-working space owners in particular worry that, you know, they're right, the sort of that scarcity mindset, and they're nervous to pick a niche. I have a woman in my mentee program. She's also Canadian, and she's opening a space that's just for attorneys, and it's a co-working space, but it's, you know, office, you get a lot of office, but she, like, every detail is for them. She knows she's herself as an attorney, and she knows what coffee they like, what size they want their desk to be, where, you know, all the things. She knows exactly what they need, and she's created a space exactly for them. I'm excited for her to start content marketing because I think her message is so clear. I'm for you. And
yeah,
you know,
well, that makes it so easy.
Yeah.
Like, creating content's never easy, but when you know who you're talking to, one of the big things I always tell people, you know, whether it's me helping them write their content or me helping them to write their own content or learn how to do it, is write as if you're writing to somebody. Whatever content you're creating, do it with one specific person in mind. You can almost create a market profile of who somebody is and write directly to them, because then you know you're going to create something that they're going to appreciate and that's going to move the needle for them and give them some value. And so when she's looking at it from a law perspective, you can absolutely dial that into to hit your target market super specifically.
So I assume this is one of the sort of first things you do with the teams that you work with. Is there generally sort of resistance to that, like identify an ideal member?
No, I actually think I find a lot of the spaces that I work with have kind of come to that point.
Okay.
And so a lot of the times when I'm coming into the process, it's that they've already realized that this is important to think about that. So, if I'm working with them on their brand messaging, then it's, we take that and narrow it down into something else. But a lot of the time they already know. Owners already know what they want to do and who they're going after. And then we just kind of dial it in and get the content going for them.
And get there. So that being said, we've talked about content marketing can be challenging for co-working space owners. So oftentimes they'll prioritize maybe paid marketing, and then they don't know where to start, or why is it that content marketing tends to get kind of moved down the list? I mentioned, I'm super into like list building, and actually for June, our community manager university training is on list building, and then it'll be about newsletter and some simple things you can do with your newsletter to be engaging. At a high level, you dive into those in details when you help people with their content marketing, but I feel like that's further down the priority list for a lot of owners and community managers who might handle that. Yeah, tell us why you think that is.
There's a lot of different reasons why it might be, and it really depends on where people are at and whether they've decided that it's worthwhile or not. I mean, a lot of people just simply don't know the value, don't realize the value. I think, we talked about with paid, the ROI is very cut and dry, whereas with content or with any organic engagement, it takes a little bit longer to see the positive results from it. And a lot of the time people it's not their core thing. They don't really understand it. They don't prioritize it. And maybe they do appreciate the value of it, but staying consistent, understanding what to write about, understanding what to put out is a lot. Even if it's not the thing that's the core aspect of your business, it's harder to focus on it. So there's a lot of different reasons why people not necessarily resist it, but maybe just don't understand why it's important, how to do it, what value it can bring back to their space.
So I'm such an ROI, like always focused on what's the return and 80-20 it. And so it's harder to do ROI for content marketing, I think, but what are indicators like that it's working and that it's making an impact? Or how would you think about with, sort of removing the term ROI, how would you help people know like if what you're doing is working or making an impact on the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really just a matter of watching changes over a period of time. I always say 6 months is kind of how long you really need to give it before you start seeing an impact. But you can start watching things like organic traffic. You can start watching things like how long people are spending on your website, how many visits they're coming back for. And then more specifically, once your content starts getting a little bit of traction, you can look at how they got to that page and then where they went from there. So if they're coming into your page on a blog post and then heading to a service page or learn more about you, then that whatever you're producing is engaging enough to lead them somewhere that they're more likely to make a purchase. So they're getting more informed and educated. You can also do things like setting up your book a tour or contact us buttons on your website. And in Google Analytics, you can track how many of those clicks and completions actually came from your content. So there are ways that you can do it just by watching the metrics. Email as well. We were talking about email before. You can see exactly how many people opened, how many people clicked, where they clicked, what they clicked. So if you've got something that's, book a tour today, you can see exactly how many people clicked through your email. So there's a ton of different things that you can watch for, and depending on how invested you are and how many things you're doing, there's, you can have more or fewer metrics to watch.
So I'm going to throw a quick question at you that I didn't put in our prep discussion.
Okay.
So I'm curious about newsletters. We were talking a little bit in our prep discussion about how important newsletters are. So you own it, right? You own your email list. We were talking, you mentioned like Instagram was down for 6 hours the other day, and it just gives you that like red flag of, oh, that could happen. And then I can't reach people, if you have thousands of Instagram followers. theoretically, that's at risk. And you can't also organic. I always talk to people about this, like organic reach on social is so low.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe it's 10%. I see that in my stuff. It's hard to get in front of people for free on social, although it's a component of what you need to do for content marketing. So we won't pick on it too much, but the newsletter is like you control it, right? You control the subject line. I mean, your readership is your open rate's never going to be 100% probably, but you can get it a lot higher than 10%. So quick question about the format of the newsletter that I wonder about a lot. And I wonder if you have a recommendation. You do a very simple, and we'll make sure we include the links to your newsletter, and you have a couple of other resources for us. Do you publish weekly?
Yeah, I do publish
weekly. It's pretty simple. It's mostly text with a couple of links.
Yeah.
So then there's like what I call the kitchen sink newsletter, which I see a lot of co-working space operators do. And I think we used to do it. And I kind of do it in my newsletter because I'm always like, well, I want to do the, here's what I'm thinking about this week. And then I want to do the member feature. And then I want to do the resource links. And so I've got a bunch of sections. And I see co-working space operators, well, we have events and we have member events and we have the member feature and we've got the deal we want to tell you about, like the kitchen sink newsletter. Do you have any guidance on which format or how to know which one might work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong to that. Like, I'll take mine, for example. I'm kind of the more is less school of thought.
Less is more.
Especially, less is more. But especially when you're publishing weekly or 2 times a week or whatever, when it's higher volume, I like to go a little bit less and make it high value, because if it's 3 times a week of kitchen sink in your inbox, people are just going to be like, this is too much. I'm inundated. So I personally, if you're publishing frequently, if you're sending emails frequently, I like to keep it short. I like to keep it value driven, couple thoughts, maybe some storytelling. And I like to include curated links that people are going to find interesting, right? It's just another way to add value for members, is give them 5 links of relevant other curated content. But if you're doing like a monthly newsletter and you're only contacting people once, then feel free to go more on the kitchen sink side. I think that there's more that you can include. When people hear from you once a month, they're going to be more inclined to read it from top to bottom without feeling overwhelmed. And then also with internal, sometimes co-working spaces will do external emails and then internal newsletters. And I think if it's already your members, then you can go a little bit heavier. They're more interested. They're already engaged. Whereas if it's kind of people who aren't engaged yet, keep it brief, give them just value, and then let them move on with their day.
Yeah, I'll stop there because we could probably do a whole episode on that. I have a lot of I would love to measure. I think the most challenging operators are those that do a lot of events. So they have something like, I'll read the subject line and it'll be specific, but then there's the long scroll through all the events for the next 2 weeks before I get to the thing they talked about in the subject line. And I'm always so curious, like, is that working, or should they do an event email and then a regular email, how to mix it up?
I always would say to people, what do you read? Like when you get an email or a newsletter in your inbox, what do you read versus what do you just file away quickly, right? I mean, it's a pretty safe bet that whatever you read is probably going to work similarly well for other people. Like if you like something that's big and comprehensive and there's a million things in it, then position it as though here's like a million things that you're going to get.
Right.
If not, I like a simple idea, 1 thing, 2 things, and a few links, and move on.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Again, it's a put yourself in your customer's shoes and what are they, or test it. I keep thinking I need to test the really simple email. And then I get stuck on but there are all these other things I want people to know. And I'm sure with the better content marketing strategy, there are ways to kind of mix up like channels for your content. So, okay, well, let's talk about, creating content. Somebody's new. Most co-working space operators don't come in with a marketing background. I always think if you come into co-working with either a real estate background or a marketing background, you're like way ahead of all the passionate people who are like, I really want to bring people together and create this amazing place for people to build their businesses.
Yeah.
you have to, bring in a lot of expertise to make the business really roll. So assuming our listeners, not a strong marketing background, I was telling you before we started, I can literally picture myself sitting at my laptop in my space in Chicago. Like, I need to write a blog post and or a newsletter. I don't even have no idea what to, like, I had no framework for content marketing at the time.
Yeah.
And I talk about it a lot because I study it so much, because I realized like I was probably a little bit similar to you. I had a big company marketing background. Like, here's your, millions of dollars marketing budget, and you've got a PR agency, and then you've got, a website agency. You've got like specialized people to do all the things and a lot of money to throw at this stuff. And so I didn't, do any of it myself. I was just sort of managing people. So when you have to actually sit down and either you're writing the content or even thinking about outsourcing it, how do you start thinking about the basics of content marketing for a co-working space? Where to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a common misconception is that it has to be complicated, but it doesn't.
Totally.
It really, really doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, if you wanted to start on your own and just get a content strategy going on your own, just focus on the basics. Start with your newsletter, start with your blog. I wouldn't even recommend starting with social media quite yet, just because I feel like you're going to get a high ROI from blog and newsletter. You can get away with.
You and I are speaking the same language on the on the social. Yeah, you have to do it. It's part of the mix, but
yeah, totally. Start with your blog and your newsletter. It can kind of almost be like one hand washes the other in a sense, right? You can use your blog to inform some of your newsletter. There's ways that you can, I talk a lot about disseminating your content, all the different ways you can, one blog article can go to seven different things. And I won't go down that rabbit hole now because it's more complicated. But when you're thinking about what to write and for whom, just you know who it is. You've already got the information at your disposal. So start with who your members or your ideal member are, right? What's interesting to them? What do they like? What do they do for work? What do they like personally? Think of all these things, ways that you can bring value to them, and just write that. I always like to tell people to create content pillars. So maybe it's, like stuff that helps them with their business, stuff they'll find interesting personally. If you're a single space operator, you can tap into your community, the city that you're in, all those kind of things. So you already have the information as to what's going to resonate. Just sit down, write it down, dial in who exactly you're speaking to, and then just brainstorm ideas of what's going to be interesting. And your content doesn't have to be long. I think a lot of people like to do 2,500 word blog posts. I think that you're better off staying with 750 words. Don't write 2,000 if you can say it better in 750 words. Keep it simple, carve out time in your day, and just make sure you do it once a week or however often you're going to do it.
So in terms of, I love thinking about pillars. I think I had a content planning session with, I'm still on the GWA board. And so I did exactly what you're describing. I just sat down with a spreadsheet and I went month by month across the top. And then marketing, leadership, finance, operations, like what are the things that operators think about? And then, what are the topics that might kind of fill in there? And then what is that, how does that manifest? Yeah. Is it a blog post? Is it a member feature? What does it look like? But it's really, to your point, it doesn't have to be hard. It can be super, super simple. And I'm curious too, I think when I started writing for my co-working space, I felt like I had to be a content expert about something. Like I had to teach people, right? You're shaking your head no. Because I think that's one of the blocks people have is like, I have to say something really smart and teach people things because that's what blogs do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the case, right? Yeah. Can you voice over?
I think a lot of it's a lot of content marketing and marketing in general is just research based, right? It's research into your members. It's understanding everything you do should be value driven, right? So what's gonna bring value to them and be helpful. And then everything else you can research, right? Nobody's an expert on everything. And if there's one thing I learned from being in PR, I was working with back in the day automotive brands and
all over the board. No
like
way to be
makeup and beauty, and so you can become a
mac and cheese. That was my
yeah, exactly, right. And I'm sure you didn't set out to be an expert in that, but you can kind of become a pseudo expert in the things that you're writing about. It's just it's a matter of learning who your audience is, learn about the things that are relevant to them, and then and then provide it to them in the form of valuable content.
So can we talk for a minute about like getting personal? Because I find in my writing, people who do content are always, talking about like getting, email responses, and I will like crickets until I start telling stories.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have to, balance it a little bit. I'm just, for everybody listening, I'll hold on the CrossFit stories for a while, because I think I've done 3 newsletters in a row talking about this CrossFit competition and all the things I, learn sort of business wise and personal wise. But I had one of my highest open rates from last week's newsletter. I'm sure it was subject line, but also then there was a story in there. So
Yeah.
I find people will hit that reply button and respond to me when I tell a personal story.
Absolutely. I'm such an advocate for the personal story. And the reason being, I think that, as a co-working space owner, who you are, it informs so much of the culture that happens in your space. I love the storytelling. I love finding a way to tie it back. And I think it applies to no matter what model of your business is. If you're appealing to commercial landlords for a managed model, then being personal can share your expertise on why this matters. And then on the flip side of the coin, if you're operating a single space or a few locations, speaking to people about, ultimately you're a business owner just like they are, right? I mean, they love to hear from it. It might not be directly applicable to their business, but I think there's a lot of learnings in there that can be reapplied to other things. I think that having that personal touch as somebody who is like them goes a long way, right? It's, people join co-working spaces to be with like-minded people. If they know that the owner is a lot like them too, it just creates that common ground. And I think it makes it all that much more appealing.
Yeah. And even, sometimes it's not the owner writing. So I run the group for community managers, and oftentimes they do the newsletters. But even doing, right, I like the owner perspective, or, a word from the owner kind of thing, if the owner's interested in writing. And I think it's such a good point. It's like, I always tell new owners, I know you're going to want to do the tours because prospective members really relate to you, because you both are business owners, if that's who your target market is, right?
Yeah.
And so you're nervous about handing it over to your community manager who doesn't actually own the business, but you can do that. But it is true. And so that the newsletter can be a way to like get the owner voice
Absolutely
inserted when the owner's maybe not on site every day. To your point, for multi-site operators, you cannot be at all the sites every day. You have to let your team do it, but it can be a way to kind of relate. And to your point, like, even though they're not in the same business that you are, everybody's still thinking about marketing and finance and email newsletters. And like, we all do the same stuff in our businesses.
It's ultimately just about getting more customers, whether your customers are members or if they're whatever other business you're in. Everybody's got the same sort of mindset, right? Yeah.
So I don't want to, go down the rabbit hole of how to multi-purpose the content, but can you just like high level for people who are kind of thinking about, well, I got to write a blog post, and then I have to figure out what to put in the newsletter, and then I have to figure out what to put on social. Like, what are a couple of your favorite things to do that kind of run across all the platforms for multi-content?
I'll speak for what I do for maybe my business, just as like a base level. You can start with write a blog post, then share it in your newsletter. I don't always like to focus the newsletter entirely on the blog posts. I like to have like a story and then include it with some other things so that you're diversifying a little bit. And then you can, share it on social media. And when you're sharing on social media, try to distill down whatever blog post you've written into the key points and leave it all there. Don't necessarily make people click away from your social media in order to get the value from it. And then on a higher level, you can think about doing things like gated content, creating ebooks. You can, if you have one topic and 10 articles about it, you can group them together, maybe have somebody design it, put it on your website as gated content so that people sign up, drop you their email address in exchange for downloading this resource. There's a ton of different stuff that you can do. You can do podcasts, you can, there's a million and one.
I would be curious if you start to see that with the folks that you're working with. There are a lot of co-working space owners now that are doing podcasts, which I love. Yeah. I think it's still such a unique way to reach, a local or a broader audience. So yeah, I didn't mean to jump on the podcast, but yeah, I think maybe a myth that people have with content marketing, because I struggled with this for a long time and I'm still like talking myself into the multi-purposing, is you think everybody's paying attention to you everywhere and that people will be like, oh, geez, I just saw that in the newsletter. Or I heard that on the podcast and I'm over that. They're not. They're
No,
not
well, and that's the thing too. Like
everywhere.
the blog people will go on and check when they want to check, but the newsletter you can deliver it directly to people. So you might be sharing something by your newsletter that people haven't seen yet on the blog, and I almost say it's a disservice to whatever piece of content if you don't disseminate it somehow. Like if you just write something and just let it sit there, then it's you're
What's the rule? Some rule of thumb, like spend X amount of time creating content and then X% of time promoting it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd say like a 50, like I do a 50-50 split kind of in my day. Like if it takes me an hour to write an article, then it'll take me an hour to go on and, build a newsletter for it, find some other stuff to include in that newsletter, put a post on LinkedIn, create something for Instagram, whether it's a visual or a video, and then write it up. So yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I think it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And it's all about what you want to put behind it, right? It's
right. But it's not, especially usually blog posts, it's not an if you build it, they will come kind of thing.
No, you need to get people to it.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, as your blog gets better and stronger and people start to love the content more and more, it's like anything, right? It's as much as you're reaching your audience, you also might reach somebody who might refer you to somebody else who's more in your audience just because you're putting out awesome content, right? If you look for a blog article on a specific topic, it might not necessarily be a company that you're directly planning to do business with, but if it's a great article, you might refer it and somebody might want to do business with that company. So it's all about broadening the surface area and just getting in front of people.
Yeah, 20 times.
Yeah, exactly. 20 times.
Right. I mean, and that's part of the reason, right? Some people are right on different platforms. So if somebody's thinking about sort of how to systemize their content creation, what are a couple of kind of quick tips you would give for that?
I just think that making sure that you have a content calendar first and foremost, so that you're not trying to make stuff up on the spot.
Moment.
Yeah, like don't wing it, right? Look, do your research on your audience, get an understanding of who they are, and then brainstorm as many topics as you can. And then have a content calendar, have timelines, have a publishing date, so that there's a layer of accountability there for you first and foremost. And then just dedicate the time, put it in your calendar, block off 2 hours once a week on a Monday or a Friday or whenever you choose to do it, so that it's there and you have to look at it. And it makes it a little bit harder to miss it. So I think it's all about just set up a system, create some accountability for yourself, understand what you're going to write ahead of time so that you're not starting cold, and then just keep it simple. Content doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to pack 1,000,001 ideas into a single post. You can focus, think about what's one question that your prospective member or current member might have, and then answer it. And that's all there is to it. Don't overthink it. Be consistent and just stick to it.
The consistency piece is a really big deal. When I started podcasting, I think in 2015, very occasionally, because I was stuck in that, like I didn't have a content calendar. I wasn't blocking off the time to do it. And so simply, I just wasn't that committed to it. I loved it and I wanted to do it, but I just didn't do it consistently. And when I started committing to, I am not going to miss a week, like, I don't care if it's Christmas, if it's whatever, I'm publishing. Yeah. My downloads went through the roof because consistency is such a big deal. I mean, podcasting is one example, and iTunes like kind of has an algorithm where if you don't put out content, they sort of stop downloading your episodes and it's easy to lose people. Yeah. But I think newsletters are the same way. If people don't know, if people don't see you for a while, they're like, who are you again? Why are you in my box? After like months of whoops. So even just the simple consistency is a big deal. I also think that content sort of begets content. Once you get into the habit, Absolutely. Your brain starts, like, I see content ideas all the time. I'm constantly like writing down ideas and saving them for later. So, but at the beginning it was harder. I wouldn't sort of see content ideas as often. So
just got to get the ball rolling, and also listen, right? Like listen to people, when they come into your space for a tour or when they sign up, And I have some clients who do onboarding questionnaires, and they get 10 questions about their members, and then all of a sudden you've got this like wealth of insights for what matters to them, and you can actually pick out specific questions that they want answered, whether it's like we said, a knowledge gap about why co-working is a benefit to their business, or whatever it might be. When you listen to people and read between the lines a little bit, you can actually pick up the exact things that they want to hear and then create it for them. You can also there's a whole other rabbit hole of like going into forums and going into places where your prospective members hang out and listening to what they're talking about, and responding there and using that to inform content. I won't go down that rabbit hole.
We'll have to do another episode because I knew we would run out of time. So for folks you've given some great tips. Some folks are going to still be a little bit stuck and say, I can't do this on my own. Can you just talk about what you do with the clients that you work with? And then I think you have a free resource for us that you wanted to tell us about. So
I do. Yeah. The first thing I do with my clients is the same thing that I would advise you to do with yourself if you wanted to get started. I just get to know exactly who their member is. Who's your ideal member? What do they want? What do they want to hear? And then I'll use that information to build out content pillars, right? Then you have 4 content pillars. You can cycle through them every month to make sure that you're giving value to whoever in whichever way, at least once a month. And then just brainstorm questions. What do they want to know? What do they want to hear? What's going to be valuable to them? How can you help them? Everything with content should be value driven. It should not be about you. It should be all about them.
Unless it's a story that helps them.
What's that story?
It can be about you if you have a story to tell that helps your members.
Exactly. Yeah. But focus it on them and how it helps them, and just be consistent. Think of the questions you can answer, and then answer them, and then just show up frequently.
And you write content and post to social, write newsletters. You and your team you'll actually run a content marketing program for somebody.
Absolutely, top to bottom. I think that, like as we said, consistency and knowing where to start is hard. So when I work with people, I come in and I take it over top to bottom. I collaborate with them to make sure that we're getting it right. But everything from publishing their content to writing it and measuring it and all those things, I take it all off your plate.
Awesome. Okay, so tell us, freebie, where do we find you? Where are the best places to find you? And we'll include all those links in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me online at tailmaker.ca. As you mentioned, I have a bit of a freebie course that's a 7-day email course that'll just give you all the ins and outs, the 101 of starting your own content strategy. So if it's something you want to do on your own, I'd recommend you check that out. And then you can also find me on Instagram at Meet Your Tailmaker.
Where specifically should they find the course? Is there a Tailmaker / or is it right on your homepage?
It'll be right there on the homepage.
Right there. Okay, perfect.
Easy.
Awesome. So we have to do this again because I think we could go down a couple of the rabbit holes that we didn't get to dive into. But thank you for joining me and for kind of giving us the high level. And we're glad you're here. I love talking to people who are focused on our industry because you just have a really laser focused insight into what space operators are up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Until next time. All right.